Hey, how's it going? This is Team Limited Slip. I am the driver of the S95 and GT500. Today we're going to make a video for anybody who wants to know if their vehicle is track ready for an HPDE or open track day event. This is an inspection form from one of the groups that goes out there. It looks like a lot, but in this video I'm going to point out the main points because I know a lot of people are smart enough to figure most of this out. So just to let everyone know, I am a Toyota certified technician and I've been working on vehicles for the last 10 years. And I am trying to simplify this process as much as I can. I also made this video for people who generally want to learn how to inspect a vehicle. If you watch the whole thing, I promise you'll learn more than one thing about cars and inspections from this video. But most importantly, we are making this video for people who have never been on the track before and to encourage them to try it out. It's really cool and it really doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. All that matters is that you go out there and put in that seat time. And shout out to all my Gran Turismo fans. I dedicate this video to you guys. Going to the track is not as hard as you think, and I made this video to help anyone out who's trying to get out there in the actual tracks. I hope you guys enjoy. Alright, so this video applies to both new and old cars. However, I advise if you have an old car, this process might take a little longer due to the fact that it may need more maintenance and repairs. However, don't be discouraged. This process doesn't take that many tools and is really simple to do. So in this video, we'll be showing you what tools you'll need to inspect your vehicle properly. For those of you doing this on the floor or in your driveway, you do not need a lift. All you need is 2 jack stands and a jack. Make sure you lift the vehicle from the appropriate lift points and put the jack stands in the correct points. Here's an example of some lift points, but if you're not sure on your vehicle, you can always refer to your vehicle's service manual. Also, if your driveway is in an incline, just like mine, it's always a good idea to put a wheel chuck in the back of the wheel just to be safe. So these are the basic tools to inspect the vehicle. You'll be needing a torque wrench to torque the wheels once you take them on and off. It's very important to have a torque wrench. Get the correct socket. You'll need a breaker bar to break the wheels loose. This right here is a brake measurement tool to check the brake pads. There's different styles of them. This one right here is to check the tire tread. It's very useful and helpful. And you will also need a flashlight because you'll need to inspect for anything that's abnormal like leaks or torn suspension parts. And lastly, the battery tester, which is also very important to test your battery. So I'm going to bring up this list once again. It might seem intimidating. Maybe it seems like there's a lot of things on the list, but most modern cars will pass this list with no problem. Like I mentioned, in an older car, you will really have to look into it to see what it's like under the vehicle to determine in what condition it's at. Alright, so let's get to it. I'll be performing inspection on this Corolla Apex. This is one of the higher trim levels in the Corolla lineup. I'm just messing with you. We will be using a vehicle that's more basic than this one. You don't need a vehicle this fancy to go to the racetrack. We'll be performing the inspection on this base model Corolla. Even this car can go to the racetrack. First thing you want to do is check the oil level. As long as the oil is between both of these dots, you're okay. Let's move on to checking the coolant. Warning, the coolant should be inspected when the vehicle is cold. This vehicle is not cold. It just came in and it's pretty hot, so the fluid level is going to be low. So that's normal. Once again, if the vehicle is hot, do not remove the radiator cap. That can flash boil and burn you. So let's inspect the brake fluid. The brake fluid is at a good level. Okay, real quick, I'm going to mention a couple items this vehicle does not have. That way you can have an idea of how to inspect it if your vehicle is equipped with this type of systems. Alright, so let's start off with the power steering system. So the power steering system has hydraulic fluid that goes from the reservoir to the rack and pinion. When inspecting these systems, you're going to notice that the reservoir has 2 lines. One that says cold and one that says hot. This can also be on the dipstick that goes into the reservoir. Some reservoirs do have a dipstick, some do not. However, it's best to inspect the system in the morning because in the morning, the vehicle will not be at operating temperature, so this will give you the most accurate reading. Once you inspect it while it's cold, start the vehicle and the fluid should rise near the hot line. If you do suspect that the system is leaking because the fluid was below the level, then check all the lines, check the power steering pump, and also check the rack and pinion itself. For those driving manual cars, some manual cars have a hydraulic system that has a reservoir. Check the reservoir fluid level. Sometimes the reservoir is combined with the reservoir from the brake fluid. So keep in mind, sometimes it's separate, sometimes they're together. They both usually typically use brake fluid, But for example, the reservoir on my GT500 is a combined style one. Here's a photo of it. In this system, it's combined, so just keep in mind that if the level is low, it can also indicate low brake pads. However, it's a good idea to inspect the full system, the lines that go from the reservoir all the way to the transmission. These lines usually go to a slave cylinder. Sometimes the slave cylinder can be located outside the bell housing, and then there's times where it can be located inside the bell housing. Both of these slave cylinders have a seal that could leak, so make sure you pay attention to them and look closely at them. So those are two components in the clutch system that could leak, but make sure you check the whole system thoroughly. So just to mention, some manual cars do not have a hydraulic system. For example, my 1995 Mustang does not have a hydraulic system. It has a cable. Alright, so let's move on to the automatic transmission. Some automatic transmissions have a dipstick so you can check the level, and some of them do not have a dipstick. If it does have a transmission dipstick, make sure you check the fluid level when the vehicle is hot, or in normal operating temperature, which is basically when the gauge is in the middle. If it does not have a dipstick, just make sure that the transmission is not leaking, and follow the manufacturer's procedure to checking the fluid level. That usually involves the vehicle being at a certain temperature and removing the drain plug. If you don't want to deal with this, just take it to a professional. These sealed transmissions are very delicate and require a certain amount of fluid. You just can't top these off. For manual transmission vehicles, they usually do not have dipsticks. You check the fluid level from the bottom of the vehicle. There's two plugs in the transmission, a fill plug and a drain plug. On some of these vehicles, you can just remove the fill plug and see if fluid comes out of it. The vehicle has to be leveled. Every vehicle is different, so make sure you check your service manual when inspecting the level. I can't stress this enough. For when it comes to fluids, the best fluids for your vehicle is what the manufacturer recommends. So try to stick with what the manufacturer recommends. That is very important. We'll be moving on to testing the battery. The batteries are very important on the vehicle. It's so important that a bad battery can even cause or trigger the check engine light to come on. In these modern vehicles, a lot of sensors require a specific type of voltage or a certain amount of voltage, and if the battery is weak, it won't send the correct amount of voltage to those components, so that will trigger a check engine light. You don't want that. It's best to start off by checking a battery. The battery literally is the heart of the electrical system, besides the alternator. Even though this vehicle is kind of new, the battery still ended up failing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and replace it. Also, something that's very important to know is that most racetracks want you to have the terminals covered, or at least one of them. I have both of them covered in my personal car. You can buy these battery covers online. They're not expensive. They can cost anywhere from $5 to $10. As long as they're secured and covering the terminals, you should be okay. That's a lot better. So let's move on to the next part of the inspection. Let's check for fluid leaks. It's a good idea to check the valve cover, timing cover, and look at the top of the engine to see if anything is leaking. At this point, it's also a good idea to inspect all the hoses for leaks. Also, heads up, sometimes the hoses tend to get swollen like this one right here in the bottom. At that point, you might want to replace it ASAP, because those can burst. So let's move on to the belt. When inspecting the belt, you just want to make sure that it's not worn. So make sure that it doesn't have any cracks. If it has letters, when the letters are completely erased, that's an indication that the belt's old, along with stress marks on them. So this belt's pretty good. So there's no stress marks on it and no cracks. So I'm going to show you some extreme examples of worn belts so you can have an idea of what a worn out belt looks like. And some belts don't necessarily crack, they just tend to wear. So there is a tool you can use to measure it. I'm going to show you an example in this drawing of what the tool kind of looks like. Before I move under the vehicle, I'm going to check what tire pressure is the correct one for this vehicle. You can find the correct tire pressure in the door jamb in most vehicles. This is for factory tires. If you have an aftermarket tire and you know that it uses a different tire pressure, you can go ahead and use it. But if you're not really sure, I would usually just go with the factory tire pressure to start with. So let's move on to measuring the tire. This is the tool I use to measure tires, and that's the diagram you're going to go based off of. This is super easy to understand. So red means that the tire is worn, green means that the tire is good. You're going to put the tool between the grooves of the tire. You want to start from left to right. It doesn't really matter, but the point is that you're going to base this measurement off the lowest point. So let's just say, for example, the tire is at 2 millimeters. That's its lowest point. That means that the tire is done. If the lowest point of the tire is at 7 like this one, or close to 8, that means the tire is good. Also, while inspecting the tread, you want to check the condition of the tire. I have included a chart here to let you know why tires wear a certain way. I hope this helps out. Sometimes tires, depending on the suspension of a car, can wear out differently, and that may need attention. So before going to the track, you might want to address that first and then get tires, then get an alignment. One last thing about tires is the importance of the date. DOT stands for date of tire. That's when the tire was made. So basically it's the week and the year when the tire was made. So the important thing here to look at is where it says DOT, because that's where you'll know where to find that number. And then the last box that says week and year. The first two numbers is the week of that year, and the last two is the actual year. So these tires are from the 31st week of 2017. The reason why this is important is because when tires start to get old, even if they have good tread, they tend to harden and eventually crack. So that's not safe, and also the tire will not provide the grip that it would if it was newer. Usually I stick with tires that are maybe a year or two old. That way the tire performs the way it's designed to. Alright, so let's move on to inspecting the brakes. Make sure you have a torque wrench when you install your wheels. It's not good to over tighten the wheels. It's actually really bad for the rotor if you over tighten the wheels. Right, so let's start measuring the brake pads. This tool is super easy to use. It goes from 1 to 10. 1 to 3 means that the brake pads are low and need replacement. 4 to 6 means they're in the middle. And 7 to 10 means that the brake pads still have a lot of life left. Keep in mind, most racetracks want you to have a minimum of at least 4 to 5 millimeters in your brakes left. Pads can wear unevenly. In a perfect world, they will wear evenly, but realistically, they don't. Sometimes the inner pad tends to wear more than the outer pad, or vice versa. So it's best to inspect inner and outer pad. So just to recap, what you're actually measuring is where the pink arrow is. That's the brake pad. That's what wears out. At this point, it's also a good idea to check the brake hoses, axles, shocks, tie rod ends, and ball joints for wear. Also, make sure there's no leaks on any of those components. So let's move on under the vehicle. This vehicle seems to be pretty clean, so it's relatively new. But regardless, I want to check the bottom of the engine bay to see if there's any other leaks, because you never know sometimes. So on this one, I'm going to have to remove this cover. Under the vehicle, this vehicle is pretty clean. There's no leaks of any kind, so that's a good sign. Also, see, I'm checking the axles right there real quick. There is no leaks on them. Also, I checked the hoses that go to the bottom, and the car is looking in good shape overall. Alright, so let's look at some examples of a vehicle that's leaking. This right here is a leak between the engine and the transmission. It's more than likely the rooming seal. It could also be the transmission housing or transmission oil pan, so make sure you look around that area. Also, it's a good idea to inspect the oil pan. The oil pan can leak from that area, so make sure that it's not leaking from there, and also inspect the timing cover. The timing cover can sometimes be combined with the oil pan, so make sure you inspect the timing cover and oil pan around where the bolts meet the block. Around that area is where they tend to leak. Also, don't forget to inspect the crank seal. They can also develop leaks over time. So to wrap this up, here's a photo of all the components of the engine that could leak, like the timing cover, oil pan. You should even check the water pump. A water pump that's leaking, the indication will be low coolant level. Or even worse, no coolant at all. So if you do have signs of low fluid level, look around the water pump. They tend to leak around the gasket or behind the pulley, where they have like this little hole called a weep hole. So since the vehicle is still in the air, I'm going to go ahead and check the rest of the components I mentioned earlier, like the shock, sway bar, tie rod ends, ball joints. This car is pretty clean overall. See, this is the rear of it. It's a little dirty, but it's still nice and dry. The bushings aren't cracked, rear shocks aren't leaking, so this car is in fair shape. If you own a rear-wheel drive car, inspect the differential. They tend to leak from the front cover and also from the rear, where it connects to the drive shaft. Now we can put the wheels back on. Make sure you follow the diagram when you tighten the wheels and use a correct torque spec. Alright, you made it this far. So as we can see, this Corolla is in great condition. It is track ready. So realistically, all the track wants is your car to be safe and to have no leaks. The reason why they don't want any leaks is because All that oil and coolant can contaminate the racetrack, and it can be dangerous for people who are driving on it. Also, you don't want to be responsible for paying for the cat litter that it's going to take to clean up all that oil mess. It will be really expensive. So that's basically how you do an inspection on a vehicle. It's not too bad. We hope you guys learned something and enjoyed this video. Please support the channel by subscribing. We'll keep making more videos, and we hope to see everyone out there at the racetrack. Keep on building and enjoying this hobby. Thanks for watching.